This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr., the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, former Harvard professor, and special assistant to President Kennedy, because she was doing this for the future. And that was also why she put the tapes in a vault to be sealed for 50 years. I first read transcripts of these conversations a few weeks after my mother's death in 1994, when the vault was opened and her lawyer gave me a copy. Everything about that time was overwhelming for me, as I found myself faced with the same sorts of decisions about her possessions that she had made 30 years earlier. Knowing her wishes for the oral history made it easy. I knew I was reading something that wasn't supposed to be seen yet, and although I found it fascinating and was eager to share it with others, I put it back in the vault to await its time. A few years ago, my family began thinking about how to commemorate the 50th anniversary of my father's presidency. We decided to concentrate our efforts on projects that would make his legacy accessible worldwide. Working with the staff of the John F. Kennedy Library and Foundation, my husband created the largest digital archive of a presidency, as well as online curricula, downloadable exhibits, and a website that will renew my father's call to service for today's generation. The publication of these interviews is an important contribution to this commemorative effort, and one with its own story. When the director of the Kennedy Library first approached me with the idea, I asked him to search the archives to confirm my mother's wishes regarding the date of publication. Surprisingly, given the importance of the material, there was no deed of gift or transfer, nor a letter of intent regarding the date at which the interviews were to be opened. There was only a brief notation by a former government archivist that these interviews were, quote, subject to the same restrictions as the Manchester interviews, unquote. By way of background, there are 3 significant interviews that my mother gave after my father's death. The first was to Theodore H. White in Hyannisport on November 29, 1963, only a few days after my father's funeral. In that interview, my mother famously told White that she and my father used to listen to the record of the Broadway musical Camelot in the evening before they went to bed, and looking back, that one brief shining moment reminded her of his presidency. White's article was published a week later in Life magazine, but the notes of his interview were sealed until 1 year after my mother's death. They are now open to researchers at the Kennedy Library in Boston. The second set of conversations was with William Manchester, who was writing a book called The Death of a President. During the sessions, my mother said more about my father's assassination than she had intended. Subsequently, she became so upset at the thought of her personal memories being public that she sued the author and publisher to keep them out of the book. A settlement was reached, and although much of the content had made its way into the public sphere, the notes of the interviews were sealed for 100 years. That is, until 2067. But by far the most important were these oral history conversations, in which my mother willingly recalled the span of her married life and shared her insights into my father's private and public political personality. The archivist's notation was not consistent with my memory, nor did it seem to reflect my mother's wishes. I checked with former members of her staff in the White House and afterwards, as well as friends and attorneys. No one had a recollection that differed from mine, and I was surprised by their enthusiasm for publication. So I was faced with a dilemma that I have confronted numerous times in connection with my mother's personal papers and correspondence. On the one hand, she was a famously private person who gave no on-the-record interviews, other than these 3, about life in the White House, and requested in her will that my brother and I make every effort to prevent publication of her personal papers, letters, and writings. However, she also saved every scrap of paper that came her way, every birthday card or telegram, every letter from her parents, every date book and diary, every draft letter or memo she ever wrote. She knew that living in the White House was an enormous privilege, and she was proud of the part she had played. Early on, when she discovered that one of her secretaries was throwing out notes and internal correspondence that chronicled both daily life and the official workings of the mansion, she wrote a steaming rebuke directing everyone on her staff to save even the smallest scribbles. Her deep immersion in memoirs of the past informed her belief that she had